Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Nightmare Alley. So, the one thing that I have to say about this movie, there is a lot of cool visuals about this film. I think the only appeal about this film is it's visually interesting, but the story is so weird, and just where we continue to go with this story is just so, like, I wasn't expecting this from this film because I went in here completely blind. I didn't watch a trailer. I didn't see or get other people's consensus about where this movie was heading. So, going into Nightmare Alley, you would think there would be a alley at some point in this movie, or you would just think that this movie is just going to have a person have their life continuing to go horribly awry and they're going to be haunted by something. And we come to find out that really we have Stan's character, who's Bradley Cooper's character, who is to eventually get to a point where you want to just be interested to see if this character the whole time is just performing to all of these people. It's some kind of act, or if he's really doing this legitimately. If Stan's character is to consistently be a move or two ahead of everybody, and he just wants to push this to the nth degree until he finally gets his hand chopped off by pushing too far. Because we eventually start to see a con artist. We eventually see a person here that in the very opening of this film, I'm just like, what the heck is going on here? And then we just turn around and we have this guy go into this carnival, go and seemingly be a part of these acts until he is to come up with his own. And he is to basically persuade people along the way. And so we continue to go on with this movie to have Stanton's character just keep pushing things to get results, pushing things to want to come up with a better swindle, a better way of him being able to get big, massive amounts of money to just pull off this one massive con. And at the end of this, we're going to find out if Stanton did really pull this off, or if Stanton is to vanish like any normal number of person when something is to go horribly awry. So, with this film, I would say that this movie just feels weird. This movie feels weird. Like, I probably wouldn't tell everybody, oh, they desperately need to go see this film. If it's something that at some point later is conveniently on some app somewhere, then by golly, see it. But I probably wouldn't have anybody go out of their way to go into a theater to watch this film. Like, I feel that this will be heavily popular in some app somewhere down the road, but I, for the life of me, can't think that this movie is going to be a popular theater release. I just feel like there's too many movies coming out now, like a Spider-Man No Way Home, or like still possibly Ghostbusters Afterlife, that is going to trump a movie that just has a weird, vague title that people don't know exactly what this movie is. or exactly how it feels. It's to be a con artist carnival swindle film, which to me just was like it's okay. It's more visually interesting than anything else. So I'll give the movie that it's really visually interesting, especially when we get to the part where Stanton is to go through this one carnival, like I want to say like ride slash journey, where you start walking through uh this one place that is to be talking about the seven deadly sins, and talking about the person walking through this place is a sinner. And I thought that was kind of probably the best visual part of this movie, to have this like kind of walk through like piece where you're all of a sudden seeing these things, and that is to just kind of reflect almost on Stanton, that he is a bad guy, that is to go through and seemingly have things turn around for him. So that's, I think, all I want to say for Nightmare Alley. I think I've kind of gone on to talk enough about this cryptically. Let's go into the movie and spoil it out, because without a doubt, it's about that time yet again to go into that double five time territory, because we are going to go into this thing called spoilers. So let's get into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So, very beginning of the film, we weirdly have Bradley Cooper in some house tossing a dead body in some hole and then burning the house and then leaving. Weird. But then we, towards the later, mostly end of the film, figure out what the heck had really gone on here. That Stanton was to go on and have his sick father in this bed, and Stanton is to finally, I guess, get even with his father by taking his sheet away from him and opening up this cold window for his father to die. I guess from the winter, from the weather, from the coldness. And so Stan needs to go on and kill his father and then burn the house. So Stan goes on and is to find a local carnival and is to go and see this act called a geek, which sounds weird. Sounds so weird. So this geek is to be a person who is to really just lose their humanity, to where they end up coming much more animalistic and go on to bite the head off this rooster. And so Clem Hotley, who is to be William Dafoe in this film, is to go on and see that Stanton is coming into this show. But then when there's to, of course, be like pay coming to pay for this act, Stanton tries to sneak away and escape, running into both Bruno and another character who, of course, is to be called the Major. So both of these characters, Bruno is to be the strong man, where he ends up going and taking. So Ron Perlman is to be called Bruno, and he's to be the strong man, where he lifts this weighted thing over his head, and then he drops it, and he ends up telling the Major, it's like, well, hey, like, my knees are shot, like, frickin' do something else. So we have Bruno and the Major saying, like, well, hey guy, like, you could probably use a job, right? you can help us kind of tear down the like this uh carnival after like everyone's left. And he's like, okay, like I'll do that. So like there'll be $1 in for you. And he's like, oh well, that's great. So and this is like the 40s, so like it's like 1941, 40 some, so it's roughly around that time period. So I guess $1 is a like is enough to possibly buy you like a hot meal and whatever. So at the end of this, we have Stanton, who is to help kind of put certain tents and certain things away for this carnival. And so Stanton is going for his pay, and we of course have Willem Dafoe's Clem going and giving of course Stanton 75 cents because there was 25 cents for that show. And he's like, yeah, you thought I would have forgotten. So Stanton is to have a radio with him, and so we have Clem who's mentioning, it's like, well, hey, like I'll give you $5 in a hot meal if you give me that radio. And so Stanton goes on and is to, of course, give him this radio for this $5 in hot meal. So they start to bring Stanton on as a regular worker for this carnival. And so we have them starting to explain him the ropes of things. We have Clem explaining how he is to get a geek, because at one point they are to lose the geek in the carnival, and so they have to go and find it. And so that's when Stanton is to go through this one uh, center kind of mirror house kind of thing. And he is to eventually find the first geek, club him, and as well as we end up having Stanton ends up getting hit himself. And Clem goes on and is to go and cage this geek again. But eventually he is to have his injury get infected. And so Clem is like, well, hey, I'm not going to like take care of this guy. It seems like he's having a fever. Like, I'm just going to let him go to be off to the side of the road somewhere, and hopefully they'll help him, because I'm not going to. I can just go and get another guy. So Clem explains to Stanton like what all he has and the alcohol that he is to have, and he also explains how to get a geek. How you have a guy that is kind of at a really bad rung of life, and then Clem starts slowly but surely like introducing him to certain things that all of a sudden is to make him an addict of sorts, where he is to basically go on and do anything for money, to where the geek is to seemingly be playing this role, but then Clem is to drive him to the point of like, hey, like you can't like just play this geek anymore. Like, and a lot of people are noticing that you're just playing this role. So eventually this character is to really just be this crazed, be this wild, and like give, of course, Clem what he wants. So now we go on and we have Stanton who's to meet this girl named Xena the Seer. This girl who is a person that is to be some kind of fortune teller, that is to tell somebody uh, if someone has died fairly recently in their life, or just kind of something about them. And so Staten is to go on to see this woman and ask her for a bath to use her tub. And she's like, well, yeah, like for a dime. So Staten goes and takes this bath for Xena to just grab hold of Staten's manhood. And they end up kind of like having this like very short uh kind of love making session, but it leads nowhere because Staten is already looking for someone else to eventually tie himself onto. So Staten is going on and being the guy around the crowd who's just kind of asking certain people things and eventually trying to feel people out. So we have Staten going and giving Pete these cards that he's supposed to read off and kind of put these like chalk things out to give to or to show to Xena through this glass, so she's looking down, seeing this stuff that she's supposed to tell people. So it gets where Pete is far too drunk and is to make a mistake here, to where now just Xena has to kind of work overtime to just be able to use some kind of gift of figuring these things out without the help of Pete here. So Pete is to be some magician, but he has kind of given up on his act because he had gone on to do things so well that people, I guess, were to think that he was to be some god at some point. And that's when Pete was decided to pull back and just became this heavily alcoholic, where eventually it just gets to the point where he drinks himself to death and he is just found drunk, and Xena is to be holding his body and Staten is to see Pete die. So Xena is to tell Staten, like, of course, before Pete is to go, that Xena wants Staten to go on and work with them, work with their act, and also go on to maybe learn a trick or two from Pete, so that way, like, Staten can maybe be able to take some act on the road at some point. And so Staten is picking up pointers and like trying to figure out how like a person can like read or get certain kind of signals or to another person, so that way that person can say, like, by talking, that, oh, like blue, and oh, like a watch, or oh, like this. So Staten is to, after Pete's death, is to go on and talk to Molly. Molly is to have these two weird devices that are to like put electricity coursing through Molly. And so Molly eventually is to get semi-electrified in this act that she's doing. And so Molly's to say that her act technically is dangerous, that it did hurt a lot and make her sore when she was to do it, but she made her body just feel numb to then be able to do the act a lot more, but it freaking hurt. So, while saddened is to watch Molly's act and just be so impressed by it, he's like, you know what, Molly, like, I think I figured something out for you. Where, I guess, when they would have the death penalty, where people would go into these electric chairs and be killed, like, Staten has had this idea for the big finishing touch of this girl's act to go into this electric chair and be electrified by this guy pulling this lever, the major pulling this lever. And so we end up having these carnival people going through this town performing this act. To all of a sudden have Sheriff Judd go and try to lock down this carnival because there seems to be several acts that are to deal with like human like endangerment or human abuse or something like that. There's some kind of thing here, there's some kind of act here that is putting people through pain. So we have Staten who's going on and pulling the sheriff aside, and he's like, you know what, Sheriff? Like, I think there is something that like just came to me, and I'm gonna pull you aside, and like I need to talk to you about this. So we have Staten who's going on and telling this sheriff about some family member of his that has some attachment to this locket that he is to coincidentally have. And so Staten is to mention about some woman named Mary that Sheriff Judd is to be like, oh my god, like, yes, like, that of course is to be my mother. And so we have Staten who's going on and telling the sheriff like this wonderful story that gets this sheriff to go on and realize, like, you know what? Like, I'm not going to condemn this carnival. Like, I'll just let you guys go on because, like, you told me something so amazing that I was just so, like, this carnival can't close down. So everybody's popping bottles and everything like that after this moment. Like, yeah, like, we freaking carnied this person. We con artist our way to work, to have this all work out. Because Staten is to get this ability from Pete before he was, of course, to die, where we have Pete have Xena go and take some item from Staten. And Pete didn't want, of course, Xena or Staten to tell him what it was. So Pete goes and figures it out that it's Staten's watch. I'm like, well, considering how much time it took to find this item, it probably was easily this watch. And so Pete is to rattle off the information about the watch and to say that it was, of course, Staten's father's watch, and that Pete and Staten had some problems in the past. And so Pete goes on, and Staten's like, oh my god, how did you know all of this? Like, how did you know everything about this watch and everything? And Pete is just like, well, because there's a whole bunch of like signals that could tell me about your item and about you. And so obviously if you're a person that is this and this and this, so that means that like you obviously would have like this watch as this item. And like it's kind of like a psychology thing where you don't have to know, you just have to know the person. You can kind of judge the person and figure out what items are in their hand or purse or whichever. So Staten is to go to Molly and is to now say, it's like, well, hey, like, how about we take this show on the road? Like, how about we go on to perform an act that is to really be much more legitimate than what we have here? It's to be like a show that we can sell out. And so Bruno is to find out that Staten is really going uh, and persuading Molly to kind of leave this carnival. And Bruno's upset because Bruno is to really, it feels like both Bruno and Molly are to be like family here. And so there's this kind of real hesitation there of technically Molly is family. So, but Staten is to continue to persuade Molly. And so when Staten decides to leave, he goes on and is tempted to give Xena Pete's magic book. And Xena's like, no, like, that's yours. Like, you've earned it. So Stan and Molly go off to do this act. And so now you would think Molly would be the focus of this act, but instead it's Staten, who of course is to be this guy with this eyed bandana on, who can sense all these things, and Molly is to be the one feeding him information via some kind of code of sorts. So Staten continues to figure out everybody's thing and is to be able to also talk from the great beyond with these people. And so Staten keeps pushing and pushing and pushing to where all of a sudden we finally have a Dr. Lilith Ritter that has now come in here and want to right here and now kill Staten's act by calling him a fraud. Because Dr. Ritter is to have a gold purse that, of course, Staten needs to know what is Ritter holding in her hand. And Staten is to not get cues from Molly because Ritter is saying, no, like, I don't want you to talk to her because I think you're getting some kind of cues of sorts of what any of this is. So Staten figures it out that it's like some kind of handbag. And so now Ritter is like, okay, well, that's good, but what's inside of it? And so Staten's like, well, the common items, like lipstick, a handkerchief. And Ritter's like, no. What is inside of here? And so Staten goes, it's like, well, it's obviously a gun with this kind of grip. And so they open the purse they find the gun, and he's like, ah, like, ah. And, but Stan's not done because this woman is to try and kill his act, so he's trying to push her to go away by scaring her into saying it's like, well, hey, why, why do you want that gun? Like, I feel it's from a source of, like, the power of it, the the like there's some kind of darker part of you that like is to like holding this gun, and so on and so forth. And so we find out that Dr. Lilith Ritter is actually some psychologist that we find out later that is to know certain patients and know things about them. And so Dr. Lilith Ritter is to go and want to therapize Staten and find out things about him, and then work with him on working these other people that Staten is to go on and get these private sessions with people, more specifically Ezra Grindle, who, like, I wouldn't probably be doing business with this guy because it seems like I would, like, if I were to be a person that could be easily afraid of Grindle, because I'd be probably sleeping in with the fishes if I were to, of course, do one thing wrong here or sneeze the wrong way, that this guy would just have me killed. But Stan is like, oh no, I'm just gonna keep pressing and like see how far I can go with this. Stan goes on is to take a lie detector test, where Stanton is to go and get information from Ritter to now try and work over Grendel here while he's getting a lie detector test. So Stanton is being fed these questions, and then he uses a part of one of the questions as a way to open up about Grendel's wife. And Grendel is to go off in the secret room to talk to people. So now Grendel is to want to have Staten into certain sessions, but Grendel keeps asking for more, keeps asking for more than just certain things of guilt and things that Grendel has done. And so Grendel, of course, is to ask to be able to channel his wife somehow so he can talk to her. And Stanton's like, okay, well, I think I can do something like that. Because Stanton finds out that Molly is to look just like his wife, so he's like, like, I think I can figure out a way to work this. So Stanton is having Molly dress up as Grendel's wife to perform this like $10,000 con, and Molly is to realize that enough is enough, and she wants to go and bail away from Staten and run off to go to a bus or train station to just get out of here. And now Staten is chasing after her to just be like, hey, this is this is our last gig. Like, after this, we're gonna retire. We're gonna be done. And so Molly goes on and does this gig, and is to put blood on her body and this dress. So we have, of course, Grendel's assistant, or his kind of his bodyguard, that is to go on and tell Anderson, is to go and tell Staten that he knows he's a phony, he knows he's a fake, but like whatever will like appease Grendel, like so. We go on and we have figured out a way for Anderson to leave here, and so now Grendel goes on and is to do this session with Staten. All of a sudden, Molly's to appear, and Grendel is to go and try to talk to his wife and puts his hand on her, but then finds out that his supposed wife is actually Molly. So now Grendel realizes that this is a sham, slaps this woman, and is to just kind of try to beat up, of course, Staten and this woman, but Staten is to go and take Grendel and beat him to death. Anderson comes in and starts shooting things up. Staten is to tell Molly to get the car ready, and then is to be chased by Anderson. So Anderson is to run after this couple, and they run him down. They run him over. They murder him, and so eventually, out of this, we have Staten, who's breaking the windows of this car and telling Molly that, like, we'll just report it stolen for anybody who's to ask. And Molly was to leave Staten a letter once before saying that that she was done with things, because Molly is to realize that soon she's going to be replaced. She's going to be replaced with Ritter, because both Staten and Ritter are to have these therapy sessions, and Ritter is to reveal to Staten this massive scar that she was to have. And Staten was to tell Ritter that he feels that she's a bad person like he is. And Staten is to tell Ritter how he is to read people, and that, like, if she thinks that she's good, like, he's better than her. So we have Molly going and slapping Staten and then leaving Staten. And we also had the one moment where Bruno and Xena and the Major were to go and re-meet back up with Staten and Molly while they're going and doing all these acts, saying like, hey, like, we're back in town, so we just wanted to just kind of catch up to just kind of see you guys again because we missed you. So Xena is going on and telling Staten like his fortune, because in the early stages of this, we have both Xena and Pete who go on and are tarot card readers, and they sometimes just kind of roll through the cards to kind of, or to try to figure out what they all mean. And so Xena is to see that things aren't going to go well for Staten because of a card and how it's faced. And Staten just goes and changes the way that the card's faced. Just say, like, no, like, it's it's this way now. Like, I've corrected it. Really telling us that he's going to be doomed. So, we have Staten who realizes that now Molly is a lost cause. And so now we have Staten going to Ritter. And so Dr. Ritter is to go on and shoot Staten because Staten had gone on to steal a key from Dr. Ritter, gone on to hear some of her recordings of her and Grindel. And so we have Dr. Ritter here going and mentioning how her handbag is heavy and how Staten didn't notice how heavy it was because Dr. Ritter is whipping out her gun to shoot Staten. And we are thinking like, okay, he's going to die here, but he doesn't. We also have Staten who had gone on to do this one other private session with a woman. And this woman had gone on to decide that they want to join their dead loved one in the afterlife. So she goes and shoots her husband, or her other, like, I'm assuming her husband, and then herself. Horrifically. So now both Dr. Ritter and Staten are kind of like rustling. And so police are to be called. Staten is to kind of quickly run out of here. And he runs off to jump onto this train. And then eventually Staten is to go on to find another carnival of sorts. And it seems like this carnival person is to have bought a deformed baby that Clem was to have before. And so it seems that this new carnival person didn't know the backstory of this whole ordeal. And so we had Staten who was to tell him the backstory about this. He's like, you know what, that sounds like a really good story that you're feeding me. So this guy is, of course, to then tell Stanley, it's like, well, like, I don't know if we really have a really good opening for you, but we do have this thing called a geek that you might be really good at. And so Staten is just kind of losing his mind at this point. And it seems that this guy is to phrase things like Clem would have phrased things, because this guy is so low on the bottom of the barrel of things, desperately going on and drinking alcohol when he would say he never would drink alcohol. And eventually becoming this darker, scarier person. And so at the end of this, we of course have Staten say, it's like, well, I think a geek is something I was born to do. And so, like, we have Staten who's going to become this geek, lose his sanity completely, and become this monster. And so, yeah, like, I guess that's basically just Staten's end, for him to just end up where nothing really worked out, to where he's just forcibly just turned into this person who is eventually going to die one way or the other. So that's how this movie just kind of finishes up. I know I might not have covered everything, but I think I covered a bulk of the chunks of most of this film. And if there's anything that did slip through my mind, oh well. That's usually bound to happen. But yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about Nightmare Alley. Just a weird, goofy film. It's a weird, bizarro kind of film, but I don't know, there was something about it too that just kind of felt like at least it's like a unique film from all the stuff that's all coming out lately. It kind of feels like a different approach of a film, and I can praise it for that. Like there is some interesting visuals of this film, and I can also applaud this movie for that also. But yeah, that's all I can say. Just with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.